Yeah, so basically in the center, what we wanted to do is we want to produce micro and nanofluidic devices which can be used to analyze the liquid biopsy samples for like a disease detection and management. And as the Maggie mentioned, we were supported by NIH and as through these P41 mechanisms. So actually, we have actually different expertise and at different locations. So we have the center at kind of headquarters at the University of Kansas. And then also we have a kind of expertise in nanopore sensing and label-free sensing technology at Wake Forest from Professor Adam Hall. And actually, I'm at LSU in the Louisiana State University, and our expertise is more fabrication technique and also the assembly technique to produce this micro and nanoscale fluidic devices for biosensing. So actually, that is the content of my talk today. So I will just give a brief introduction on nanofluidic biosensors, and then I will just touch briefly some fundamentals of molding and demolding process. And then I will just focus on how we developed nanoscale injection molding technique. Okay, and then I will just give some examples of the nanofluid sensors that we produced here in our center for our actual applications. So, biosensing. So basically, biosensing is the detection and identification of a kind of broad spectrum of, the molecules or biomarkers for some specific diseases, ranging from like a small DNA all the way through the bacteria. So, and this slide shows some scales, the length scale for different biomarkers, DNA, protein, exosome, virus, and so all are basically the nanoscale or kind of low microscale. So it is kind of natural that the nanofluidic devices has become a very useful tool to detect, manipulate, and also analyze those relevant biomarkers, okay, on the single molecular level. So there was a very good review papers produced from this Vigolo group last year. Okay. So actually, the most nanofluidic devices utilize kind of new phenomenon associated with this nanoscale size. And those new phenomena include, for example, here we have nano confinement, or well, basically at the nanoscale, we have a dominating surface charge effect, or at the nano and micro interface or nano macro interface, we have kind of the concentration polarization effect. And also when we have a very, very small, like a nanotube, and if you just flow the water molecules through this nanotube electrokinetically, we have extremely fast velocity through this. So basically, you can alter kind of fluid properties. So using those different nanoscale phenomenon, also researchers developed different applications, which are shown in the right side. Okay, so for example, the first cartoon shows basically the optical-based the genome mapping, okay, for the single molecular analysis. And also, using this concentration polarization, you can pre-concentrate analytes, okay, with ultra low the concentrations. From this ultra low concentration analyte, you can kind of pre-concentrate. Or also we can analyze kind of subcellular behavior, for example, like ion transport through cell membranes, okay? So if you look at those nanofluidic biosensors, you can classify into two different types broadly. So one is nanochannel-based the nanofluidic devices, and the other one is nanopore-based, the nanofluidic devices. So nanochannels are basically formed in plane over substrate. Okay, and they have been used for many different applications. And those applications include, for example, here DNA stretching, manipulation or detection of single molecules. And also you can manipulate the molecular transport using this entropic trap. And also there is some other application, like as I mentioned before, like the pre-concentration of different molecules, desalination, and also you can use this nanochannel for nanofluidic diode applications, etc. And the second type of nanofluidic device is nanopore. Okay, and basically most of nanopore devices utilize resistive pulse sensing. So when an analyte just pass through the nanopore, okay, and then basically the ionic flow is temporarily restricted, and which will produce kind of signal. So nanopore peaks. Okay, so basically nanopore peaks is kind of characteristics of the molecules and analytes, and then also the properties of nanopore itself. Okay, so basically utilizing this nanopore sensing, now we have a kind of commercial tool to do the sequencing of like a DNA and RNA, so commercially available. Okay, but that is very useful because it can provide label-free the sequencing and also long read, high throughput, and low cost sequencing informations. So now fabrications. So how we can fabricate such nanopore and nanochannel devices. So actually nanopore devices are traditionally formed using these focus ion or electron beams, okay, within kind of thin membranes like a silicon nitride or silicon oxide or aluminum oxide membranes, okay, while nanochannels are mostly formed in plane, the inner substrate, okay, and also using focus ion beam milling or e-beam lithography. But as you already know, those fabrication tools are not really cost effective. Okay, so the fabrication cost is high. And also when after you make these silicon-based devices, so it requires very high bonding temperature. Okay, for like mostly you have to really increase temperature close to 1000 degrees C. So the problem is if we want to use these nanofluidic devices for like precision medicine applications, normally precision medicine application requires a huge amount of genomic information. So also the fabrication of those devices should be very high throughput. Okay, so basically, we can think that those fabrication method, FIB or e-beam lithography, is not really adaptable for those precision medicine applications. So in our center, okay, our focus is basically the molding technique, micro and nano molding technique. Okay, so basically it looks pretty simple. And as I show here, it's you can see this molding technique everywhere, even in the kind of kitchen technology. So here you have a kind of waffle maker, okay, and what you need? You need basically dough. You need to produce dough, and then you need to have a kind of mold, right? And then you put a waffle maker, and then you put this dough into waffle maker, and then while you heat, and then you close this machine, okay? And then the dough will be hardened after a certain time, and then you open the machine again, and then basically you remove the waffle from the machine, and then you have really nice waffle. So now, what kind of engineering we have here in these waffle fabrications? So those we need to develop kind of a new or very tasty dough, and also you need to develop kind of this mold, okay? And normally we need to spray the mold surface to kind of reduce the stiction from the waffle from the mold surface. You need to develop a surface coating, and then now also you need to optimize the process, the temperature, and then also the time for cooking. And after we have this waffle, then we have to think about how we can improve the throughput. Okay, and you can also come up with the kind of automation strategy. And finally, once you have waffles, okay, then we need to think about what you want to do, okay, applications. So, in our center, okay, the first we spend most of time in developing the nano imprint lithography, as I mentioned before, okay, and this is actually the video of the both thermal imprinting or UV nano imprint lithography performed in my lab. Okay, so basically you have you put assembly of your substrate and then your stamp, and then you put into machine, and then which was heated above the TG of so glass transition temperature of your polymer, and then you apply the pressure, and then the polymer will be filled into the cavities, mold cavities, and then now you cool down, okay, so that your polymer becomes hardened, and then you remove your mold, and then you have the structures, okay? And for UV imprinting, the principle is very similar, but instead of using thermoplastic, we use UV resin, and then we harden this UV resin by UV curing process, okay? And then again, after separation, we have the desired micro and nano structures, okay? But normally the process of producing one single sample with nano imprinted lithography is around like 15 to 20. Sometimes if you have like large structures, sometimes it goes up to like 30 minutes. Okay. For UV nano imprinted lithography, it's a little bit quicker. Okay. But still, okay, around 10 to 20 minutes production time for single sample cannot be really used for like production of the nanofluidic devices. So basically, nano imprinted lithography can be considered as kind of medium scale nano fabrication tool. Okay, then so recently, actually, we kind of focused on developing kind of injection molding technology for these nanoscale fluidic devices. So actually, for the injection molding, the machine is a lot bigger first, okay? And then what you are doing is you put the thermoplastic granule into hopper, okay? And then while you heat, and then you kind of melt these thermoplastics, and then now you just push your thermoplastic into your mold, okay, using this screw. So I think the direction is changed, but you have a screw, and then now here you have mold. And then basically by screw, you just inject a certain amount of molten thermoplastic into the mold cavities, okay? And then basically normally there is an ejection pin which push your specimen out after the molding. Okay, so this is actually the typical the molding process that actually we are currently doing. And as you can see here, to produce each sample takes around 5 seconds, or at most 10 seconds. So compared to nano imprinted lithography, nano injection molding is really the high throughput production type of technique. Okay, actually, nanoscale injection molding is not new. Okay, it has been used very probably 20, 30 years already, and you're very familiar with those optical discs like a CD, DVD, a Blu-ray disc. Okay, those are actually produced by injection molding. So again, the nanoscale injection molding is not really new, but the most of the structure, if you see the most of the structures produced by injection molding, those structures are very periodic. Okay, it's very regular structure mostly, and then those are mostly for these optical applications. Okay, and another thing I want to point out is in order to develop injection molding process, okay, first you need to produce these micro and nanoscale structures, okay, by the combination of microfabrication tools like a photolithography and also nano fabrication tools like electron beam lithography or focused ion beam milling. Okay, but after fabrication of master mold, you need to replicate into kind of the durable metal stamp using electroforming process. But this process takes a really long time. Okay, normally it takes like a week, okay, to overplate with uh, uh, with very good replication fidelity for the nanoscale. Okay, so which means the initial tool cost is very, very high compared to this nano imprinted lithography. Okay, so most people, they just develop kind of prototype devices using nano imprinted lithography, and they have to develop separately the scale of fabrication technique like injection molding. And so I just tried to Google some nano injection molded nanofluidic devices, and there are not really many. Okay, I found actually several, um, but here I just show some examples. So the first one, actually, this is um, the paper from this Montelmas et al. And actually this is not actually the nanoscale devices, but they just reduce the depth of their microchannel into nanoscale. So basically the depth is nanoscale, but actually the lateral dimension is not really nanoscale. And also if you see here, also they uh, so, um, they just use actually those device, okay, to kind of trap this the particles, okay, depending on the size of particles. And I see also several other the nanofluidic applications, but again, their size is not really nanoscale. And also here you can see very periodic structures. So now, what we are doing in our center, okay, this is actually one of the typical, one of the device platform that we are working. So here we have, this is actually 5 micron the scale bar. And here we have the micro channels, and then here we have nano channel. And then basically if you look at the end of nano channel, both sides of nano channel, we have a small dip, and we call this in-plane nanopore. And then the depth of nanopore is around less than like 20 nanometers. And once you put a cover plate on top of that, and using thermal fusion bonding, then actually the size, the effective diameter of this in-plane nanopore becomes less than 10 nanometers. So actually, this is typical device we are using. But what you can realize was it is not really periodic structures. Okay, and then this is that structure contains kind of multi-scale structure, including nanoscale and microscale, and also kind of macro scale, okay, for inlet and outlet of those analytes. Okay, so normally some challenges to develop this nano injection molding includes, for example, it's difficult to produce master molds with high quality. And then if you use actually those multi-scale structures for molding, also that can result in kind of non-uniform filling, okay? And then now, if you have a slight deformation during demolding, I think the microstructures won't affect so much, but these nanostructures, okay, will kind of lose the entire device functionality. Okay. Another challenge is, as I mentioned, electrode deposition is really, really long and the time-consuming process and also costly. So the injection molding can be used for production type fabrication tool, but not for research and not as a prototyping tools. Okay. So in order to enable this nano injection molding for kind of versatile fabrication tool for nanofluidic applications, we have to overcome such challenges. So let's just move into some fundamentals of the molding. So that shows the thermal behavior of thermoplastic polymers. And in the left side, this is for the amorphous polymers. In the right side, this is for semi-crystalline polymers. Okay, but let's just discuss the amorphous polymers. So at low temperature, most of the thermoplastic polymers are kind of brittle, okay? And they're kind of the glassy state, which is hard, like a solid, okay? As you increase the temperature and you have a TG, which is the glass transition temperature, and once you pass this TG, then your polymer becomes softened, okay? It's not really melted, but it's softened. So without applying pressure, the polymer can maintain their shape. However, if you apply the pressure, then polymer can deform, okay? And that is called kind of rubber states. And if you increase the temperature further, and you have now the melting temperature, okay? And once you pass this melting temperature, then you have kind of viscous melt, right? So depending on the temperature regime, you can you have kind of different applications, okay? At low temperature, you have kind of cold molding or shaping, but most of the nano-imprinted lithography were done around like 30 degrees C or 30 to 50 degrees C above the TG, okay? And injection molding is performed basically above the melting temperature of the polymers, okay? At the viscous melt states. And basically, this slide shows kind of the smallest feature you can produce using the thermal molding. Okay, so basically, this is the polymer chain, which is kind of entangled states, right? But if you kind of calculate the radius of gyrations, okay, and basically you calculate the radius of gyration based on the end-to-end distance from the single chain, right? And then basically you can get the radius of gyration using this formula. And if we try to apply the PMMA with a different molecular weight, so 25K and 950K, okay? And then basically you can get the radius of gyration of around 2 nanometers and 8 nanometers respectively. Okay, what does it mean? This means actually the smallest the feature size you can clearly the differentiate with the thermal molding is around like 2 nanometers. Okay, but this is a case when we use 25 K molecular weight polymers, but if you use low molecular weight like UV resin, then actually it can go further down below like 1 nanometer. So basically, there's no limitations in terms of the smallest feature you can produce using replications. So now once you apply kind of pressure at a temperature above the TG, okay, and then what happens? So this is the case when we have a nano-imprinted lithography, okay? So once you kind of apply the pressure while you have a thin layer of the thermoplastic polymers, then basically you have kind of squeeze flow. So squeeze flow means upon pressure, the polymer at the top of, mostly at the top of this film should flow laterally, okay? And to fill into the cavities of your mold structures, okay? And this is basically the simulation results, kind of old simulation results. But what they want to show us how they feel, how the polymer feels by the squeeze flow in nano-imprinted lithography depends on the surface charge density as well as the size of the structures. So when the size is large, And then mostly the thermoplastic polymer will fill first along the wall of the structures, okay, and then it will fill into the gap. While once you have nanoscale features, then it's a filling like the plug, okay. But for injection molding, okay, the filling behavior is slightly different because we are not using the rubber states, okay, above TG, but we are now using the viscous melt states, okay, above the melting temperature. So, but there are two main things which is kind of different from the flow behavior in nano-imprinted lithography is, first of all, um, the polymer behaves like a non-Newtonian flow, okay? And then another thing is for injection molding, you basically using this screw, you inject the molten polymer into the mold cavities. So basically the filling rate or shear rate is very, very high. Okay, so you have to consider these two effects when you analyze your data. So actually there is some theories, and this is one of the theory which you can adapt when you kind of model kind of microscale injection molding. So in this formula, basically they include the effect of shear rate here. Okay. And then actually this is the kind of traditional WLF, the model, which describes the temperature dependence to kind of viscosity. Okay, so and this slide, this result shows basically one of the simulation results showing the injection time versus mold filling. Okay, so basically injection time means the time to inject the same amount of the same volume of the molten polymers. So the short injection time means you have a very fast injection, while the slow injection time, a longer injection time means you basically have a very slow, kind of low the shear rate. Okay, so actually what you can see is as you increase the injection time, means as you the lower the shear rates, basically the filling becomes worse. Okay, and that is associated with the shear thinning behavior of most the polymers used for injection molding. So as you increase the shear rate, so as you increase the injection, as you shorten the injection time, the viscosity becomes kind of smaller. Okay, so basically you prefer kind of a high injection speed over kind of low injection speed for like a better filling of your molten polymers into the micro and nanoscale cavities in injection molding. So after the polymer is completely filled into the cavity of mold cavities, now we have to consider the next step is basically separation of the molded substrate from the mold, and which is called demolding. Okay, so the question is how we can improve demolding. Okay, so this is actually one of the simplest the model to describe the adhesion at solid interface. Okay, so if you can see, the adhesion is a function of surface tension. Okay, this is the work of adhesion, and K is basically composite Young's modulus, and R it corresponds to basically the contact the area. Okay, so basically by controlling those factors, we want to reduce actually adhesion between this the molded polymer from the mold surface. Okay, so what can we do? So we can do several things. So in order to reduce this work of adhesion or surface energy, we can apply anti-adhesive coating layer. Okay, and normally the R is contact area, so which is determined by stamp geometry. So there are nothing we can, not a lot of things we can do here, but also we can control kind of K, which is composite Young's modulus. Okay, but basically we can reduce this composite Young's modulus by the properly selecting the materials. Okay, so basically what we are doing in our center in order to improve demolding is we want to basically lower the modulus, okay, basically, so adhesion during the demolding by lowering this composite Young's modulus. So instead of a hard mold like a nickel metal mold or silicon, we just use actually the low Young's modulus material like polymers or like a resin. Okay, and by doing that, actually we found that the demolding characteristic improved really significantly. So another advantage of using this polymer or resin as molds material is we don't need to do the expensive electron beam lithography or focused ion beam milling every time when we need the new molds. Okay, once you make a silicon master mold, you can easily replicate, okay, into this polymer or resin molds. So basically, we can save a lot of cost for mold fabrication. So based on this, the principle, we developed kind of the process which enables kind of rapid prototyping of nanofluidic device fabrication using injection molding. So, so here, first we need to produce the silicon master mold, and we combine photolithography with the focused ion beam milling. So once we have this master mold, then first we replicate this master mold structures into kind of UV resin stamp. And depending on the polarity, sometimes you need to replicate twice or 3 times. Okay, and then for the final mold, normally final resin mold, we just produce on in the kind of resin, UV resin, which is coated on very thick kind of the metal block. Okay, and then basically we use this as kind of injection molding mold. And then now we just install this mold into injection molding machine, and then we do injection molding. Okay, so actually we also try to use actually different types of UV resin for like injection molding for different devices. The bottom line is that depending on the structures or complication of the structures, you need to really use a different UV resin. For simple structures, we try when you try different UV resin, mostly that works. But this is actually one example structures that we are using in the center, which consists of like a microchannel and like an interface here, and here we have nanostructures. In this case, we found that one of the mold UV resin, which is called MD700, is kind of most the efficient. Okay, and if you look at the characteristics of MD700, actually normally this is very low Young's modulus material, so we can lower kind of demolding characteristics, and also the surface energy is very low. Okay, so it has inherent anti-sticking behavior. So after the injection molding, we can easily remove this resin mold from the injection molded substrates. So here, just I don't want to go over all the parameters, but actually those are parameters to control the process for injection molding, which includes like injection volume, mold clamping pressure, polymer melt temperature, or mold temperature, injection pressure, injection time, and also packing time. So you need to actually control many parameters to kind of optimize the injection molding process. So here just we show the one example of optimizing the process parameters. So here what we did was we just tried to change the the mold temperature. So basically, this is the temperature at the mold surface. And then we just try to evaluate how well the mold cavity is filled, okay, for different thermoplastics. So this is COC 807, COC 5013, and then we have, COP, and then we have a COC 5013. So in general, as mold temperature increases, okay, we have a better filling, which makes sense. Okay. However, you also need to consider demolding characteristics. Okay. So again, the SAM image shows the master mold structure in silicon, and then we using this same master mold, we try to injection mold at two different mold temperature. Okay, with this MD700 resin mold, and then what you can find was as mold temperature increases from 60 degrees C and 70 degrees C, now the replication fidelity becomes worse. Okay, so I just tried to see what happens, and then actually recently there is a report that normally there is the demolding force is lowest at an intermediate mold temperature. So when you do the demolding at a very low temperature, then you have a very high thermal stress. While if you do the demolding at an high temperature, then you have more adhesion. So you have kind of optimum demolding temperature between this low temperature and high temperature. And this is what we see here in these experiments. So even though the higher mold temperature is good for filling of polymer melt into mold cavities, okay, that is not always good for the demolding characteristics. So you have to kind of optimize this the process to develop nanoscale injection molding. So actually, this is one of the example of injection molded nanosensors that we produce in our center. So this is again the silicon mold structures, okay, and okay, the size of the depth of this implant nanopore is around the 20 nanometers, and then now after replication, we just try to do high resolution AFM, and then you can see this pattern is really replicated well. This is kind of another example of the device that we produce. We call this XTOF, exonuclease time of flight device. So basically what we are doing is we just try to introduce some DNA or RNA analyze, and then we have some enzymatic reactions here in the nanoscale enzymatic reactor, and then the reaction product is detected using this dual in-plane nanopore sensors. Okay, so it's pretty multi-scale structures, and then we could produce very well using this nanoscale injection molding technique. Okay, so the one important thing is how reproducible those structure made using this injection molding. So actually, we just tried to determine replication fidelities. Okay, so actually, we made really many chips, like 101 chip from the single UV resin stamp. Okay, and then we just collect some samples, and then we just try to analyze the dimensions of this implant nanopore. Okay, so and that's basically what you can see is this the error. So device to device uniformity is really good. Okay, it's a kind of if you are considered the half width of nanopore, then it's around 7.6%. While if you consider the depth of nanopore or depth of this nanochannel flight tube, this is kind of around 4%. So nanoscale injection molding really produce a very good device-to-device uniformity. Actually, this is the last slide. So that's what Also, the one of the things we can do to check the uniformity of your device is after you fabricate this nanofluidic devices, you put the cover plate, and then you fill your nanofluidic device into a salt solution, and then you measure the current, and which is called open pore current. So what we did was we just tried to get uh, several chips produced from the same the mold insert, okay, and one made by injection molding and one made by nanoimprinted lithography. Okay. And then again, for those devices, we put the cover plate and we fill with the electrolyte solution, and then we just measure the open pore current. And then we just try to see how uniform those currents are. Okay. And what you can see is what surprised us was the the uniformity of this open pore current is lower, way lower for the sample produced by injection molding compared to those produced by nanoimprinted lithography. Okay, so even though the throughput of injection molding is way higher than nanoimprinted lithography, the sample uniformity is also higher. Okay, and we thought about why it happens. And actually, if you look at the demolding process, for the nanoimprinted lithography, we do the demolding kind of manually. While for injection molding, we have like an ejection pin. So after each injection, the demolding will happen spontaneously. So basically, demolding process is more kind of uniform, which will produce more uniform device-to-device variations. Okay, so actually today I wanted to just emphasize that nano injection molding is basically a high throughput production type fabrication technique for plastic nanofluidic applications. And so far, it was not really used for like prototyping tools. Okay, but actually with the development of these resin molds, now the nano injection molding can be used as a kind of a prototyping tool as well. Okay, so if you are interested in using injection molding for your application, then actually our center is ready to kind of help. Actually, we have like two different mechanisms to collaborate. One is collaborative projects and service projects, and collaborative project is more kind of bi-directional, and is more kind of the let's say so intensive collaboration. While if you just need simply what we have developed, we can kind of help in the form of service projects. So if you need any help, that you can contact our center or any PIs, also including me. Okay. I think with that, I will close my seminar today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sunggook, very much. We have quite a lot of time for questions, and so if you'd like to answer, just unmute yourself and ask a question. So I want to make sure that people understand. So you did talk about the ability to provide service and collaborate on the imprinting, but does that also involve the actually fabrication of the nanostructures? Can people contact you and seek help and collaboration on that front?
Yeah, I believe that what we are servicing is not only confined to the molding technique. I think if you want to really produce some nanoscale structures, but you don't know how, then I think we are ready to help.
And I have one more question that can be the topic can be of interest to people. So um, we are now gearing up to start using what's it called beam pen lithography. Is
Mhm.
there any way you can, I mean, can you tell us a little bit where you see this being an advantage way of fabricating micro or nanofluidic devices comparing
Oh,
to the
F,
either
F,
focused ion beam or well certainly limitation of the lithography.
yeah, I think one of the current limitations in nano manufacturing is to produce highly parallel nano devices. Okay. Um, the focused ion beam milling or electron beam lithography, definitely this is a kind of serial fabrication method, and you cannot really make a large number of devices. And to my knowledge, the only available tools to produce really highly parallel devices using EUV lithography. But you know that this is very, very expensive, right? So the beam pen lithography that our center recently acquired is basically AFM tip based lithography, but instead of using a single AFM tip, you have um, array of
Array.
a lot of arrays. Yeah. So and then it utilizes kind of near field optics. So you shine the light from the behind of this cantilever with parallel AFM tips, and then basically you can kind of focus your beam into the small area of the AFM tips. So you are doing the lithography using this beam pen lithography. So I believe the current limitation of beam pen lithography is that you can produce structures smaller than kind of 100 nanometers, but not really 10 nanometer level. Okay, but if you want to really produce like 100 or 50 to 100 nanometer level parallel devices, I think that can be a very useful tool as well.
Um, for people who are also listening. So, what is now what's your the lowest size that you can fabricate? And then is there by using um, some additional tricks, sacrificial layers, can you lower actually where do you think you can go? How low can you go with the nanopore sensing?
Oh, so I think we really haven't addressed that a lot in this seminar, but um, it- it- again, so the one device I showed has a nanopore depth over 20 nanometers, right? Now you put the cover plate on top of that. And then by thermal fusion bonding. And thermal fusion bonding intrinsically involves fusion of polymer chains from the substrate and cover plate, so which will reduce the size of pore, right? So after the thermal fusion bonding, you can control the final in-plane nanopore size. And once we measure the open pore current and kind of estimate the pore size, it can go down to like kind of a few nanometers, 2, 3 nanometers easily.
Awesome. Please don't hesitate if you have any questions.
Meg, I have a question.
Go for it. Yes.
Dr. Park, actually, I had two questions. The first one was, if you have time, the first one was more for the first, on the beginning of our presentation, you talk about the fabrication of the microstructures, and then you mentioned some of the challenges. One of them that you mentioned was the high temperature, and you said some of the methods would go around like 1000 degrees Celsius. So I was
Oh,
confused
no,
which one.
no. So if you are to make a device into silicon,
Uh-huh.
then how you can put the cover plate? So you need to do the silicon or silicon bonding, right?
Uh-huh.
So normally for this silicon bonding, you need a higher temperature.
And it can go that high, close to
Yeah,
1000? Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, and the second question was for when you talk about the injection molding, you mentioned the replication fidelity, right? So thinking about the steps, I can see the step of the pellets of the polymer, then melting, and then you inject into the cavity mold.
Correct.
And then I understand that if you have a higher temperature, of course, you're gonna influence that. But then I was thinking there is also a step of cooling down before the molding. So why the mold temperature? What we consider the mold temperature? Because I was thinking before you have the high temperature, but then you cool down for the molding. So this would not technically affect the fidelity if you have this transition of temperature. So I was curious, how
There's
do you consider that?
so you can define the fidelity in two ways. One is how well it feels. You have cavity, you have the field. In order to have a better feeling, as I showed in one of the slides, you want to have a high mold temperature, right?
Yeah.
But if you have a high mold temperature, now for injection molding, normally the process is very quick. So normally demolding will occur almost at the molding temperature, right? So if the temperature is high, then during the separation, there will be higher adhesion, and which will kind of destroy the replication fidelity. So my point is, for better filling, higher mold temperature is good, better. However, that is not always good for better demolding. So you have to consider both aspects, and you have to optimize the process.
But then you talk about two separate temperatures there, right? Because you have the initial one for injecting your polymer to the cavity mold that should be higher, but of course later after that, after the mold, you have the drop of the temperature. So I see like two temperatures. So I was trying to understand what do you mean by mold temperature, since you have those two steps.
So you have more temperature, okay? And then now before demold, and then basically you inject and feel, and then there is some hold time, right? And then now basically, so if you kind of stop heating, okay, then probably the more temperature will go down a little bit. But we are not really fully cooling down as we have done in NIL, nano-imprinted solar, right? So basically, during the demolding process, the temperature will go down slightly from this mold temperature, but it's not much different. Okay, so my point is, if you do the separation at a higher mold temperature, then you have a higher adhesion, which will destroy your replication fidelity.
Thank you.
Do I see any other questions for Sunggook? Okay. Thank you again. I'd like to say that we have prepared 3 more webinars this year. These are planned for November and December, and one of them will be actually on the beam pen lithography. And I want to say that this novel methodology is actually can be used not only for the microfluidics or nanofluidics fabrication or nanostructures, microstructures, but a lot of different surface patterning. Also, we will have a webinar on ethical use of artificial intelligence in enhancing your writing and reporting skills. And also, very one that I look forward to will be a comprehensive course on using a statistical analysis, defining and designing power analysis for your research. So I'm hoping you will join us, and you will be hearing from us soon on specific dates. I want to thank you again for joining us. I want to thank the speaker, and have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.